Good morning on this Wednesday, October 20th, 2021, from the bright lights of Broadway in the big city, the Big Apple. Let it be known, we are talking statehood for DC as it continues to be at the forefront of politics in the nation's capital. And while many also warned that Democrats and others should not forget the importance of statehood for Puerto Rico, we talk with journalist James Wright of the Washington Informer, who has followed the statehood story really for a long time, and the architect of DC statehood, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. But first, we're going to stay right there in the district because at Howard University, as you may have heard, the students have some demands. Artists from Gucci Mane's The New 1017 label embarked on a major HBCU tour last week. Rappers Big Fizzle, Big Scar, Enchanted, Hot Boy West, and Big Walk Dog pulled out all the stops during their high energy performance at places like Jackson State University and Morehouse, but they were scheduled to go to Howard University. But they have joined the students who have been staging a series of protests against the unlivable campus conditions they are being forced to live with. Well, this morning we have a couple of special guests to talk about that. Let's bring on Howard University senior Ericka England and Maria Jones, a Howard alum with the Capstone Group. We also have James Wright of the Washington Informer. Good morning to each of you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Stacy.
Good
Well,
morning.
good morning. And Ericka, I'm going to go first to you. You're a senior at Howard University. You are there on the ground. You've been there from day one. What's going on? Can you just break it down for our audience as to what the students face at Howard University?
Well, at the beginning of the semester, there was an issue with upperclassmen being able to receive housing. Typically, freshmen and sophomores are prioritized or considered priority when there's a shortage in housing. So there was a scramble because all the students, not just at Howard, but all the students in the greater DC area were coming back for the fall semester. So essentially a lot of upperclassmen were pushed off of campus and not able to receive housing in the beginning. Now those that did receive housing are having issues, health issues in the dorms. That includes everything from mold and uh, pests and flooding, pipes bursting, issues with water, all of those
Yeah.
things.
And I understand too that there are issues. Mold is obviously bad enough, but you have the rodents, you have other situations. Maria Jones, you're of the Capstone Group. You went to Howard University. I'm sure it's still like you still go there at times, right?
Mhm.
Because the solidarity will always be there. Tell us, when did you guys get involved in this, and what is the most alarming thing about all of this to you?
Well, it's alarming because it continues to be a generational culture of dysfunction. The capstone got involved. Really, we've been involved and we were inspired in 2018 by the student protests of 2018 to get involved and to form the capstone group. So, what we do is we advocate for the stakeholders, students, alumni, and faculty and community members. But when I heard that this was happening to the degree, the mold, the rats, and I saw it, it wasn't just hearing it, but I saw and I talked to the students' firsthand accounts. I was extremely disturbed, right? And even more disturbed that President Frederick would not come down to the students and fellowship with them and listen to these accounts, horrific accounts firsthand. Like deal with it.
Yeah, yeah, and some Erica will say, well, you know what? This is family. This is family business. This is HBCUs. We're airing some of our dirty laundry. What do you say to that, Erica?
The issue is that a lot of times students feel like they have to take another avenue to get their issues out because administration isn't listening, because the board of trustees isn't listening and isn't acting. So we have to be creative with how we're getting our information out. It's sad to me that the school has to be almost forced or shamed into taking action and taking care of these issues.
Yeah, and that's Maria and Ericka. Let's bring in James Wright. James is a reporter for the Washington Informer. He has his finger on the pulse of all things DC. James, jump in here. What do you see? You seem that prior to us going live, when Ericka and Maria was describing some of the things going on, some of the things caught you by surprise.
Yes, Stacy. I was really caught by surprise, and I really would like Ericka to elaborate on this in terms of the student trustees. Are there students on the Howard University Board of Trustees presently?
Not with voting power. No, I think they tried to. Um, I think they tried to give some lip service to the concerns that were raised and reinstate students at the committee level, but there hasn't been a proactive plan on how that's going to happen. But the voting power, the ability to speak on behalf of ourselves is not there any longer. And along with faculty affiliate positions and alumni affiliate positions as well.
So
Well,
you're basically go ahead, Stacy.
yeah, and I want Ericka to kind of break down. I'm looking at here some of the demands, but I want you just to give us the top maybe 3 or 4 demands. I know it's more than 3 or 4, but give us the top 3 demands.
Well, another one that's developed since this all started is amnesty for the students that have participated in the takeover, in the sit-in. Unfortunately, not just Howard, but institutions have a issue of retaliation against students. So we're asking for amnesty. Another thing is for President Frederick and administration to have a town hall with the students. I think there's an issue and breakdown in communication. There's a lot of closed door meetings or one-on-one conversations that's not available to the broader student populace. And that's part of the issues. Like most of the times when I need help with information, it's another student telling me and not administration. So there's a breakdown, there's a barrier with communication. Another demand is that we have a comprehensive plan to combat the housing issue, because housing has been an issue at Howard for generations, and I'm concerned for future bison coming in that this is going to keep happening. And the last demand is that we be reinstated with voting power back on the board of trustees, and that's for faculty, alumni, and students.
Yeah, and just so everyone know, the National Newspaper Publishers Association has reached out to Howard University's president, Dr. Fredericks. We have not yet heard back, but the relationship has been a good one across the board. So we do anticipate getting word, if not having Dr. Fredericks on this show. If we do, we're going to invite you back as well, Ericka and Maria, because we think that's an important discussion to have. But along those lines, Maria, a town hall, as Ericka mentioned, it seems to be the least that they could acquiesce to.
Absolutely. That's an easy one. What is the problem with having a town hall? He could have one on Friday when the alumni, parents, and students will be there. That's an easy one. What Ericka mentioned about reinstating the students, the faculty, and the alumni, that's particularly important because anything else is less than democratic. We need to bring back some semblance of democracy. We have to have our voices heard, and we have to increase the capacity, the power on the board, so that, because where's the money going? Howard is in receipt of almost $1 billion in recent endowments since George Floyd's death. And where's the money going? We need to have a stake in where that money goes, and it needs to go to the student needs and the faculty needs first.
Yeah, and I want to stay with you for a second, Maria, because this is nothing new to you. You have been you went to Howard 1984, I believe it was, to 1988. there were some situations even then, and certainly later on in the 1980s and going forward. Talk about your experience with having to, as a student, and now of course as an alumni, but having to deal with the powers that be at Howard University, because it's long before Dr. Fredericks.
Absolutely. And I just want to be clear, it's the faculties and the faculty and the student that is the heartbeat of Howard. The administration has always been detached and appearing to be unempathetic towards students and faculty. We've got to change that. And I think the root cause of that is Black self-hate. See, because if you loved yourself, you would never allow your students to be treated that way. You would never treat them with indignity. You would treat them with respect. You would have all of their basic needs accounted for and laid out. So we need to look at that as a root cause and explore it and deal with it and take us to a different level as Black people. We have the power. We are the gifts from God. So we have the power to do whatever it is we want. And we have to sustain this institution. Part of sustaining this institution is treating the students well. These students are top scholars. They have top GPAs. They have top SATs. They could have gone wherever they wanted to in the country, but they chose Howard because of the strong legacy that Howard has. So we got to work on that.
Maria Jones is throwing the gauntlet down. We appreciate, as they say, the real talk. Ericka, in the few moments we have remaining, talk about, please, where do you go from here? I know one of the issues, before I even go to that question, though, one of the issues that you mentioned before we went live was, and I thought was really interesting. Now, it may not have been a hot button issue, it's still yet an issue. The hiring of Nikole Hannah-Jones. Why was that an issue with the students?
It wasn't an issue with the students, to my knowledge. I think we were very excited for her to come, her along with Ta-Nehisi Coates. It was an opportunity to learn from someone who's very knowledgeable. I think there was some hypocrisy around that, though. At her previous university, the issue was that they were denying her tenure, but her vote for tenure came up because there was a student trustee who demanded that there was a vote on her tenure. A lot of students came out in support of Nikole Hannah-Jones, so they demanded that there was be a vote for her tenure. The vote came up. Ultimately, she turned it down, and she decided to accept an offer from Howard. Now, it's just interesting that a student was able to bring up her vote for tenure. But if that same scenario were to happen here at Howard, a student couldn't bring up a vote for tenure for a professor here because we don't have the ability, we don't have the seat on the board any longer with voting power.
Wow. And, I saw a comment just now from our publisher down in Fort Lauderdale, who always gives us some great comments and questions. But Bobby Henry, he says, Howard U is not the only HBCU suffering from the invasion of self-hate. He goes to your point, Maria, give you a chance to respond to Bobby.
Yeah, Bobby is right. I mean, this goes back to when we were enslaved in this country. We're doing really well. I mean, in a sense that we are so far along, but we have some deep-seated issues as a culture, as a people. We have to learn to love ourselves. When we cease taking for granted our superpowers, if you will, our talents and gifts, look at what we have given to this country and the world. That's what we need to focus on and be clear about who we are. And then we will treat ourselves with dignity, respect, and whatever we need to sustain our institutions.
Maria Jones, Ericka England, we thank you so much for joining the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known this morning. Now we're going to switch over to DC Statehood with Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. Good morning, Congresswoman.
Good morning. Can you see me?
I can see and hear you. You look great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We certainly know that you are we like to call you the architect of DC Statehood. We know that you have worked tirelessly. No one has worked harder or smarter. So we're at a point now where we're as close to statehood as we've ever been before. What has to happen now, Congresswoman?
You're right that we're as close as ever. In fact, we couldn't be closer. We have had hearings and passage in the House. The House has passed the bill twice. In addition, we have had a hearing in the Senate. And you know, the Senate is prelude to going to the Senate floor. In addition, we are having yet another hearing. The first hearing in the Senate was to hear from officials. Now the Senate wants a hearing to hear from DC residents. So this issue is burning up now in the Congress, and we are hopeful that we could get some action this Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. And James Wright of the Washington Informer has been covering the issue of statehood for quite some time. James, I know you have a couple of questions for the Congresswoman.
Sure, Congresswoman. Many Washingtonians want to know, and could you explain to them what is the problem in the Senate?
The problem in the Senate is that the Senate is very closely held. We are 50-50 in the Senate. That makes any bill very difficult to pass. To get statehood, we should only need the usual vote. What we are facing now is a possible filibuster for not only this bill, but many other bills. But I'm even hopeful on that because Democrats won the Senate because Republicans use the filibuster on virtually everything. In fact, the Democrats held up organizing the Senate, knowing full well that they too could lose it if they let the filibuster guide them. So I think we have every reason to be hopeful with now 2 hearings in the Senate, 1 coming up, and with passage twice in the House.
Yeah, and Congresswoman, having said that, talk about how vital it is now, particularly as voting rights are at stake everywhere. You know, we see these laws coming up in Texas and Florida and other places that really almost outlaw voting for people of color and other minorities. Having statehood could actually tip the scales there, right?
Well, it certainly fits in with the extraordinary national interest in voting rights for all Americans. So this issue fits right into where the public is today and also encourages me, since we are part of what could only be called a movement to strengthen voting rights.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk a lot about, and I know it's it's one thing at a time, right? But we talk a lot about the importance of DC statehood. Well, has there been more discussions about statehood for Puerto Rico?
There has been a discussion. In fact, we had hoped that Puerto Rico would be a partner, since most states get statehood by coming in with 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. We don't even know whether Puerto Rico would be Democratic or Republican. There was some hope that they might be Republican, but they are having problems on passing, their own statehood bill. So we're at this moment, we're trying to do it out on our own. But a very hopeful sign is that a detailed poll was recently done. It was very detailed, asked people the questions about statehood in many different ways. And according to that poll, 53% of the American people now support statehood for the District of Columbia.
Wow. And I guess, James, in your report, have you ever found it as high or high or higher than that?
This is definitely the apex in my reporting. Many people are beginning to ask questions about DC statehood, and this is from across the country. There are organizations in Iowa and in New Hampshire talking about statehood, and that is definitely unprecedented. And I do want to ask the Congresswoman along those lines, Stacy. Congresswoman, do you find there's a lot of I hate to use the word ignorance about DC statehood beyond the Beltway?
There is. First of all, many people think we already have the same rights they have. For example, they see me going on the floor to speak on the floor like everybody else. They don't notice that when that final vote comes on the floor, that there is nobody registering for DC. They even see me in committee where I do have the vote. So there is some confusion in the country about the district status.
Yeah, and one of our viewers, and I'll throw this to both of you, Congresswoman Norton and James Wright. David Youngblood is asking for an explanation on a former deal that Utah regarding DC statehood.
Yes, that had to do with voting rights. That didn't have to do with statehood. That was when Utah had lost, did not get an additional seat, and it paired with the district. And unfortunately, that was filibustered. DC did not get that extra seat. That was for a House vote only.
And another great question from Claudette Perry. She says, how has gentrification in DC tipped the scales for DC politically? DC used to be almost 100% Democratic. With statehood, would we really tip the scales in the House and Senate? I think that's an outstanding question with gentrification.
Well, gentrification has not affected politics in the district whatsoever. The district is now, at one point, it was about 70% Black. It's now 50-50 Black and white. For most of its history, by the way, the district was majority white. That people don't recognize that. I predict it's probably going to be a majority white again. But the whites in DC vote exactly the same way as Blacks. So the racial composition seems to be quite irrelevant to how people vote or whether they choose to live in the district.
So to her point, Congresswoman, there's no concern that DC would that those scales would go the other way from Democrat to Republican. It's still a Democratic city.
It's still a Democratic city, and if it went from 50-50 Black to white to majority white, given how DC residents vote, I have no doubt that they continue to vote Democratic as they do now.
Yeah, and earlier you and James, you talked about the 50-50 split in the Senate. We also recognize, Congresswoman, that you have two Democratic senators who are not always on board. In fact, some have said that Senator Manchin of West Virginia and Senator of Arizona are Republicans masquerading as Democrats with their policies. Why is it so difficult to get Democrats in the Senate? And maybe you can't really speak too much to it because you're in the House, but why is it so difficult to get Democrats in the city and in the Senate on the same page?
No, I can speak to it. Being in the House doesn't keep me from understanding what's happening in the Senate. Those are two very conservative Democrats who we have trouble with on every single bill. So there's no reason why we wouldn't have trouble with them on DC statehood.
Yeah. It's the progress, it seems that when you have a first-term president, a new administration that comes in, and you have control of the House, and you have central control of the Senate, not like you have in the House where you have the most votes. It's even in the Senate, as you've already stated. It seems that the party of the president that has this control, generally that first term agenda gets through, not necessarily easily, but it gets through. And it seems that President Biden has had one big struggle, particularly because of those aforementioned senators.
Yeah, I'm pleased to say that the president is making progress now. That progress we've seen in the last 2 days. But yes, those senators make it difficult for the president, not only on statehood, which he strongly supports, but on his own close agenda.
And Congresswoman, stand there for one moment. I know we are almost out of time, but have you personally had an opportunity to have any type of really substantive talk with Senator Manchin and with Senator Sinema? And if so, what's your feeling as to why they are such hardliners?
I haven't spoken with these senators, and they're not hardliners. They simply are conservative Democrats. To take Senator Manchin, for example, he comes from a state that is basically a Republican state. Mm-hmm. So on all matters, on all bills, the Senate has huge problems getting him on board. So that would explain certainly DC statehood, since they have problems getting him on board on the pending bill that we're trying to get through right now.
Yeah, and quickly, Denise Rolock Barnes, publisher of the Washington Informer, is right. Nancy says, as it relates to Claudette's question, we should also acknowledge that there is a statehood party in DC. What influence have they had on the statehood initiative?
Well, it's pretty difficult to say that the statehood party itself has had an influence when you consider that most people in the district belong to the Democratic Party. So their advocacy has been important. It's hard to say it's been pivotal when you consider that most of our residents are Democrats, and this has been a Democratic Party a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And James, before we close, a thought from you on statehood, and any final question for the Congresswoman?
Yeah, just one quick question, and I want our viewers to understand this. Congresswoman, what role has the Congressional Black Caucus played in terms of DC statehood?
The Black Caucus has been very instrumental in pressing for DC statehood. You know that Barack Obama, when he was in the Senate, was a member of the caucus as well. So it does help to have a caucus that is always online for an issue like our Congressional Black Caucus.
Well, this is a conversation that certainly will continue to go on right through till they finally make that last vote and say DC is now a state of its own. And it will be because of the work, the tireless work of Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. We thank you so much for joining us this morning. And James Wright, we look forward to seeing you again on this program next week, James. And thank you all for watching. We appreciate you. Stay safe, stay well, wear a mask, get vaccinated. We'll see you tomorrow.